Good afternoon. Welcome to this third and last online workshop on the topics of concern for churches in this COVID-19 era. And as Mike said, they have been hosted or available through a partnership between Lackawanna and Northumberland and Lehigh Presbyteries, and supported generously by the Synod of the Trinity. I want you to remember that this workshop is going to be recorded, as were the first two. And if you want the link to this recording, I believe that it will be sent to you via email, but you can also find it on the Lehigh or Northumberland or Lackawanna websites. My name is Rhonda Cruzy, and I'm the Transitional Presbytery Leader in Lehigh Presbytery. And I'm really happy to welcome Reverend Bruce Reyes-Chow here to lead our workshop today. Bruce is an author and a speaker and parent, consultant, coach, podcaster, pastor, no more a Facebook user.
Yes, moderator.
Well, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
He speaks and writes on issues of faith and technology and race and parenting and church culture. In 2008, he was the youngest person ever elected as moderator of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA. I didn't realize that. I mean, I knew you were the moderator. I didn't know you were the youngest ever. He is currently the pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto, California, and a senior consultant with the Convergence Network, and also a Gallup certified strengths coach. Bruce has an active online presence and can be found on most social networks via B Reyes-Chow. So anyway, thank you, Bruce, for joining us today. But before we start, I've asked Steve Curitan, who is the Executive Presbyter for Northumberland, to open us with prayer.
Good to see everybody today. Thank you so much for joining us. This time, let us bow our heads in prayer. Dear Lord, for months we have done things that we never thought possible and discovered new ways of worshiping you and connecting to each other. Many of us are at a crossroads. Do we go back to what we've always done? We find ways to move forward, connecting in old and new ways. Today we're going to discuss some of that possibility. So be with Bruce as he leads our discussion, and be with us all and help us open our minds to new possibilities as we discuss these important issues. Be with all of our congregations, with all those who are finding this time to be especially challenging, and guide us in these next 2 hours. In your name we pray. Amen.
All right. Thank you all. It is good to be with you. It's great to be with my people, Presbyterians, and this Zoom thing has allowed us to be connected together in much more imaginative ways than we probably ever thought we could actually do. So grateful for the invitation. Good to be with you. We're going to spend a couple of hours together. We'll do some Q&A in the midst of that. We'll do breakout groups for a short time in between all of that. I can always talk for 2 hours. This doesn't mean that I should. So we're going to make sure that everybody's engaged and able to kind of process a little bit. This is going to be pretty packed with information and ideas. So I will share the link to my slides later with your leadership so that they can send that out to you. And again, it'll be recorded as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So you can turn my face off on the side if you want, or you continue to see my little box up there. So some of what we've experienced over the last, however many months you all have been at it, the congregation I'm serving, our last service was March 8th. So it's been, I don't even know, 3 months now. And, I think a lot of folks, as we began all of this, we really overfunctioned. We wanted everything to be perfect, all those kinds of things. And I think that as we've gone through this, we're realizing that Grace is more abundant than we probably ever imagined or thought, and sometimes we're the hardest on ourselves, those of us that are helping to lead congregations. And so just as we begin this, I kind of like to tell folks, in some areas, sure, be tough on yourself, but in this technology and as we're using all of this, while there are other denominations and traditions that are better at this, or they've been doing it longer, this has not been where we've been for a long time. And so just give yourself a little bit of space to not be perfect at it. All right, so today we're going to talk about two different areas. The first one we're going to do is I'm going to talk about church life on Zoom, and then the second part will be hybrid church. The first section you've probably been doing a little bit, but I want to give a little more guidance around Zoom worship and congregational life and some of the things that I've seen and trying, and a lot of some more ideas kind of things. Then I'm going to move into the hybrid church as you all are thinking about what does this look like next? What does it really mean to exist with these connections we've made in different ways? What does that look like for the future? So we're just going to dive in, and let me tell you a little bit about what we'll do today. So I'm going to do a little bit of intro, and then I'm going to do part one, the church life on Zoom. We'll do some Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can do some Q&A. Please feel free to talk during all of this in the chat room. I'm not monitoring it, so you can talk about me and I'll never know. But you can also put questions in there just to make sure that during the Q&A time, those get back so that I can respond to anything that might be helpful. I also encourage folks in those chat rooms to go ahead and resource each other. I think best practices we've all been trying to discover, and there's a lot of wealth of knowledge and experience, I'm sure, among the 125 of you. We'll do breakout rooms. I have just a couple of really kind of general questions to help us think about the future. And then I'll do hybrid church, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end of that. And then that'll be our 2 hours. All right. So let me do a quick introduction. Oh, also would love, go ahead and, I assume most of you know each other, but you introduce yourself in the chat room if you want to, just to kind of give folks a sense of who's in the room. But let me do a quick intro. This is me when I was about, 18 years old, was working at a law firm, sitting typing on a computer. Life hasn't changed much since then. I joke that this is probably the last time I wore a tie like more than a day in a row. I had to wear a tie every day at that place. I come out of the Presbyterian church in Stockton called Trinity Presbyterian Church. So I'm born and raised Presbyterian, and born and raised Northern California. So have been in this area. So that's what I know. That's the context in which I've grown up and my faith has developed and have served. So very West Coast kind of religious person, but deeply, deeply connected to the Presbyterian Church. I now pastor a church, First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. I've only been here about a year, a little over a year now, after 30 years in San Francisco, pastoring different churches and starting a church and doing some other stuff. First Presbyterian is, as you can kind of see from the folks that are there, it's a little older. It's predominantly white congregation, but it's a church that is deeply ingrained in justice work. It was in its DNA were anti-war protests. They were a sanctuary church for conscientious objectors. Robert McAfee Brown was one of the preachers and spoke a lot at this congregation. So it has a deep, deep history in justice issues, which for those of you that know me, I'm just in my element with this community. And they called me to help try to figure out what does it look like in the future? How do we retell our story? Because the area is much younger, much more diverse than this congregation is. So we're trying to figure out how to reconnect with the church. So that's where I serve now, which has been a great, great place. I'm there 3/4 time. It's a weird situation. I'm a 3/4 time pastor and head of staff. So we have other full-time positions, and I get to do things like this then with the rest of my time. I also have 3 children. So I've had for a long time kind of a social media laboratory. You get bonus points if you know what picture they are copying. For those of you, I'd be interested to see if any of you know, but this was on a trip last summer, and they were playing around and doing some pictures, a show to shoot modeling after a band. But anyway, I have a 24-year-old, 19-year-old, and almost 17-year-old. And so we've got to walk with them as they move through their online social media kind of world and have a pretty good relationship with them and watching how they've navigated all of this, which has been great for me as I'm watching what's going on. And then I've been doing this online stuff for a long time. Some of you may have been involved, 10 years ago when I was leading a worship service on Twitter that we did every Sunday. And so this is as we shifted into this new world of online ministry and kind of cloud-based kind of gatherings, was really ready for it, had very little anxiety. I know that's not the same for everybody, but it certainly helped our congregation kind of not be so weary of where we were headed. And then finally, I'm very fancy. I always like to show this picture just in case anybody thinks I'm too big for my britches. This is my worship outfit on general days. So there you go. All right, here we go. Let's start off. We're going to do this first section called, I like to call Okay Zoomers. Because really, most of us, this is not our natural place of being. This is not where we hang out all the time. And I wanted to make sure that we are able to take an honest look at what's going on. I'm getting a little feedback, so I think somebody's unmuted. Just FYI there, someone in the room. So let me tell you a little bit. That's where we're going to start with this. I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding your context. I'm going to give a few pointers for how you can Zoom a little bit better. Then talk about worship and prayer, and then building community online, and then finally a little bit of leadership conversation to go. All right. So the first thing I want to say, though, is that I am not interested at all in the debate whether online or in person is a better expression of community. I gave that false dichotomy up a long time ago because I think it's not really worth our energy and time to try to figure out if there is a right answer to the question about online or in person. What we know is that both have a great opportunity for people to connect. We've known from the days of MySpace, where kind of groups on the outside edges of society, or kind of fringe groups or lifestyles or communities or whatever you want, however you want to describe it, have figured out that online interaction in the community is more accessible. It's can be less judgmental. It's a place where you can gather when you're geographically isolated. There are lots of great things about online. And now in person, obviously, we miss being with each other in our large communities and gathering. But I think when we have this battle between online and in person, we're basing it off of the idea that all in-person interactions and community gatherings are good. And what we know is that that's not true. I mean, my home congregation, I love my home congregation, but that doesn't mean that every Sunday when we would gather that we knew everything about what was going on or that all the relationships were positive. In fact, I know that afterwards in those deeper conversations, whether it was in person one-on-one or whether it was online or whatever it would be, those help to enhance those in-person gatherings. I just feel like most of the conversations when we enter into what is better, online or in person, we make huge assumptions about both, right? Either if you're a big online supporter, we want to kind of say that this is the best way to be in community. Well, there's problems with online. And if you're an online person or an in-person person, you might say it's the only way to have church is in person. Well, we also know, again, not all church interactions and relationships are positive. And so I think there's, again, I don't get into this debate and would encourage folks really to not get into it, because I think it's not a good use of our time and energy, but just to think about online and in person as enhancing and different kinds of relationships. All right. So the first thing I have for you is this, is that going along with that a little bit is that you need to be who you are, right? Those of you that are doing worship, you're conducting worship, leading worship in the way that you're doing it, that you've probably by now found your sweet spot, whatever that's going to be. You found the place where you now like to live. And I think that's great. I think one of the hardest parts about this is that, again, we like what we do individually, so we tend to think that that's the best way to do it. So, you know, for me, our congregation does 100% live all the way through. Others of you, that you pre-record everything. And I think you have to figure out what your capacity is for doing this, but to really own your context. Like, you know, not everybody can do live Zooming because of internet issues for your congregation. Not everybody can do certain things because of maybe the technological capacity of certain folks, your ability to help people, or lots of things. For me, pre-recorded makes me anxious because I kind of feel like I'm one of those that would want to get it really right the first time. Those of you that can just do one take through and you're good, that is an amazing gift to yourself. And you record it, you put it up, and then you can take it easy on Sunday, which is great. I'm not that person. And so needing to know where I sit and how I do and lead the congregation I'm serving. So what I'm saying is just honor your context, honor yourself in terms of how you're going to do what you're going to do. Partner to that is to know what your capacity really is. Now, this isn't an excuse to not challenge people to step into some new technologies, but it is to be able to understand what is your personal capacity for using technology, your communal capacity for using technology. What does it mean for your folks and how they can actually use the things that you're encouraging them to use? Who gets left out? Who gets brought in? I think all of these you need to just figure out what is the capacity for your congregation. This is a big question I'll talk about later with the hybrid church component. That is not going to be the way to be church in the future. It is going to be a way to be church in the future, but not everybody has the capacity to do it. And I'll dive into those a little bit later. So I encourage you to really kind of figure out what can you really do and do well. Again, this is not an excuse to let people just use, I'm not going to get online and kind of try to keep you hostage by that. But it really is a time to figure out, does it make sense if 25% of your congregation doesn't have internet access to do X? Does it make sense if the internet in your community is not strong enough to be able to do Zoom consistently and well? Do you have a community that you don't have people in your congregation that can go out and help people get them on the phone, help walk them through how to get onto Zoom, so that you're not doing it all? So just figuring out what that actually looks like for your community and then responding in appropriate ways. So this is your translating part, right? I do want to make a pitch. As soon as I said live or not live is better or worse, I'll make a pitch for doing live Zoom if you're able to do it. And for those of you that are like trying to push into something new that you haven't done, I feel I love a 100% live Zoom service. You might be able to throw videos in between, but I think there is something about seeing each other's faces. So whether you do a live service and you do reveals during the service, or you do a coffee hour after watching your recorded video, seeing people's faces. We do a couple of reveals during our worship where everybody gets to see everybody's faces should they choose to share their video. And that, I think, has been one of the most amazing parts of our service, where folks really engage in it. The other thing is that for those of you that pre-recorded a couple weeks ago on Thursday, and then kind of our country's streets kind of the uprisings and protests started to happen, a lot of people I know felt like, oh no, I already recorded, I'm done, and they're going to get a sermon on Sunday that I wish wasn't the sermon they were going to get because there was more to say. I think you get to be more responsive with live Zoom preaching, that you get to actually, like, you're showing up Sunday morning, if something went down on Saturday, you're able to respond to it. And so that's another one. And then for me, I'm just one and done. Like, I get to just be done with it on Sunday, and then I'm off the rest of the time. So that's just a pitch. If you've been thinking about getting into live Zoom and you need a little bit of nudge, there's some really good elements about Zooming. We can talk about that later in our conversation. All right. So if you are using Zoom, would encourage you to Zoom better. I don't know how well you are using it. I have no way to assess that, but let me give you a few kind of things that we do that we found helpful. So be consistent in your slide design. If you're using slides, this goes for most things. Please do not kind of font barf over all of your stuff where you're using multiple things, but to use just a couple of fonts, couple of colors, use master slides. Those of you that are big into design out there, hopefully you're like, yes, thank you. But for those of you that are really struggling with your slides, these are really basic. We try to be too complex and in most of what we do. Just be really consistent, and I'll show you a couple of designs that we use in our congregation. But just to allow people, what we're trying to do with our Zoom experiences is to not make the technology or the visual distracting. And so when you make simple, really streamline it and make it simple, then you're able to have the content be what's going on. Simplify your transitions. So when you are, I know a lot of people, when they started doing live Zoom, were trying to do video and sound and all these different kinds of things. And I would really encourage you, if you're thinking about this, just simplify, simplify, simplify. In our service, we transition back and forth between slides and gallery maybe 3 times, and we do a video rarely, because I feel I don't want the technology and any glitches to take away from the experience and the flow of what's going on in worship. There's room for mess ups and there's a lot of grace, but I try to get ahead of those as much as possible, which means that you have to practice. So I run through my slide sermons. I practice more now than I did before. And so I think that part of this is really getting comfortable with the technology and practicing. Practice your transitions, get multiple people to log in. Some of you have joined me where I've done a sample Zoom worship, and we try to get folks in from different parts of the country to see what it's going to look like on the other side. So practice with your setup. Have people log in as well so they can see what's happening on the other side, just to make sure that, again, the technology is not going to be distracting. And then the other thing is clarity. It always matters what you're doing. So make sure that you have decent microphones. I don't know what your presbyteries are doing, your synod's able to do in terms of helping with some of the finances around upgrades in equipment. But I would encourage you to, if you're still using the microphone off of your computer, if there's any way you can get an external microphone, do that. Make sure your lighting is good. So my lighting, if you look at the picture that's on this slide, it's a little bit extra. I do have photo lighting because behind me, you can see in the reflection is our backyard. So I lead worship from our backyard, and so I'm backlit oftentimes. So I have Supermondo lights in front of me, but lighting is really important. Again, don't have the look be the distraction. Lightings, make sure you're checking what your backgrounds are looking like. I really don't encourage you to lead worship with one of the background, using the false backgrounds in Zoom. Because those can often be distracting. Your folks can use them, but would encourage you not to do that. I think the edges of bodies and all that as you're leading makes it feel a little bit disjointed. So just to make sure that your background reflects what you want to do. You're not trying to recreate worship at sanctuary, but make sure that it feels like you want it to feel for your worship service. This is an example of the slide that we use as folks are waiting in our waiting room. So we use a couple of fonts. This is a consistent, the only thing we change really from worship to worship is the background image on kind of our main header slides. So these are our slides that kind of block out our main components of our order. So everybody would recognize this, and that photo becomes consistent. And again, we use Helvetica Neue for those of you that are font geeks, and that's the only font that we use in our stuff. So this is our what the slide that sits in our waiting room while folks are coming in. Not in our waiting room, as folks are coming in as we're entering them from the waiting room. This is the image they get during our prelude time. This is our announcement slide. All of our announcement slides look exactly the same, different colors and different image on the side, but there's consistency in our announcement slides. And then this is what our standard slide looks like for all of our text. So we, again, I just encourage you to simplify. Don't add images unless you really need to. Just have fonts that are easily read, light on dark, and be able to, so that folks, again, they get into a habit and they can see what's going on. Now, you all may be doing a lot of this. I hope that if you're not doing some of this stuff, they'll begin to think about how you can make your slides look a little bit better. All right, so let me talk about our worship and prayer and how we engage in that work. So this is a picture of our community in communion. The way that I talk about this for us is that we had a lot of people that are like, oh, we just want to do our worship service online. And I really kind of pushed on that language that that's not what we're doing. We're reimagining a worship experience that happens to take place on an online platform. So, because if you start to get into the idea that we're going to do what we did there and just transfer it over, one, it just doesn't work. It's not as good. It's not, the flow is weird. There's just elements that don't work online. But to really reimagine rather than replicating. And so really beginning to think about what does it look like to do what you want to do in a worship service and how you want that service to flow and what are the elements you want to have, and just be able to use the platform in a way that reimagines that versus just replicating what you used to do on Sunday in person. So you use the elements that you have, especially if you're using Zoom, right? You use your *6 for your phone people, your *9 lets them raise their hand, use the spotlight, again, use the raise hand, bring in guests that you've never been able to bring in before because, well, they're not living where you live. So we bring in all of our offering partners, the partners that we support financially or our people work with, volunteer. We bring a different offering person in every Sunday from either our local area or from another part of the country who are doing good work. We brought somebody in from Minneapolis a couple Sundays ago who's with the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, came, they talked about what was happening actually on the streets of Minneapolis as things were really at their height there. I mean, there's so many opportunities to use this platform in a way that you would not be able to do when you were meeting face to face. So use those, unabashedly use those, because that's what they're there for. I encourage people to talk in the chat room during worship. This is probably the most controversial thing that we've done, is that we have some folks that feel like it's distracting to see the little pop-ups all the time. But I actually think that most people are talking in their heads during worship most of the time, or not really paying attention, or they'd have a question they want to, and I don't want to stamp that down. I would actually encourage people, interact in the chat room. If there's something that strikes you, put it in there and interact with each other. During my sermons, I give everyone a chat room question. So they actually have a question that I encourage them to engage with as they're listening to me. Go ahead and talk in the chat room as well. And that, it generates a lot of really interesting conversations that I never see. It's great. And then the last thing or second last thing is to make video optional. I think there are a lot of folks that there are a lot of reasons you don't want to have video. One, you may just be tired of seeing your face on the video. And even if you do spotlight or you hide your video, like, you just don't want to look at all the stuff. People are tired. It's fine. So we make video optional. The other piece that's really important is not everybody wants everybody to see inside the place where they live. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, that, well, this platform allows a great ability to welcome new people into a community. One of the gifts is it opens us up to folks who come from a lot of different contexts from our current congregations. And as we're broadening that, not everybody is comfortable just showing you what's in my bedroom or what's in my house. And some, they may not live in a place that they're particularly proud of at this point, or they want everybody. So just to be aware that having people not use their video, you got to really name that as optional. I think it is a much more inviting posture. And then I'll encourage people, lead as if everybody is new. I hope you are already doing this in your in-person worship services, but we do a rundown of Zoom etiquette at the beginning of every service. We don't do a bulletin. I introduce the order of worship at the beginning of every service. I acknowledge new people. We acknowledge visiting folks. We try to make the service as if everybody was new, and in order to make it as welcoming as possible. All right. A couple more things, then we'll do some Q&A. So as you're doing, so that's one, worship and things, as you're thinking about your building community. Some of you have been doing a lot of this stuff already. Again, I may not be giving you a lot new, but if you're looking for other ways to build community online and on Zoom, we do a thing on Tuesdays, which has worked out really well for us, and I love it. It's called Breathe, and we do, it's a Lectio Divina, half an hour. We do Lectio. Nobody has to prepare anything. I just kind of take that time. Total, there's about 20 minutes of silence in that 30 minutes, and the rest is prayer and a little sharing and reading of scripture. And that has worked out really well for our folks. So figuring out a way to honor just a different pace of using this online kind of world. And on that, we have people that show up after they've been online all day. They turn their video off and they just participate. And I think it's been one of the things that we've offered to our community that's been really healing during this time. So figure out a way to, again, you're doing what you would do in a congregation, but now you're just shifting it to an online platform. So how would you want to pray with people at the end of tough days or an end of tough week? What are those kinds of things you'd want to do? We also do a happy hour once a week and desserts and check-in gathering time. So to find some ways to just have people check in who may not want to, may not have opportunities to do that in other places. We do that every Thursday night. And I know that other folks, like, they do that with their family already or their friends. And so they don't necessarily need that. But this is for some folks, they just want to check in with their pastor, with other people. And so we have a core of about 15 people that show up every Thursday night just to check in from the day. And it's a good mix of people who are living on their own, some of our seniors who are locked down in the retirement communities, who are very active and just need to have interaction. So it's a good way to think about how you're gathering your people just for fellowship. And then if you want to get really brave, some folks are doing variety shows and open mics and live concerts that are really kind of cool. So we're going to plan one for the summertime around doing an open mic and just having people bring their gifts, and you get spotlit on Zoom and you play or you sing or you do a spoken word, and then we switch to someone else. So find ways to engage people. Again, what are things that you might want to do in person that you can now still do on this online presence? And then the last thing, please run your meetings well. In person or on Zoom, meetings that are not done well are going to destroy community. So if folks know they're showing up to a meeting and it is not done well or not led well, if your technology is not working well, if you're constantly having to remind everybody all the time about the mute and unmute and all those kind of things, make sure that you're prepping ahead of time so that you know how to use the elements that you have. So how to share your screen, how to share videos, all those kinds of things. Make sure that your meetings, your technology is not taking away from the content that you want to do. All right, last section here before we do a little bit of Q&A. All right, so leadership, as you're going through this, build yourself a worship team if you haven't already. We have a team of about 12 people now, which seems a little bit big, but it for our congregation, that seems about right for us. So we have our liturgists, we have our greeters, we have chat room bouncers that watch out for any nefarious kind of stuff that's happening. And then we have we call them tech deacons, who are on the phone or they're texting with people or they're chatting with folks about if they're having problems getting set up. Our greeters are greeting people while they're waiting in the waiting room, letting them know what's happening. And then they're greeting them as people introduce themselves in the chat room during worship, sharing. We have folks that share all the links. As we walk through worship, links are shared in the chat room for how to give to the organization that's talking, how to give to us. Here's the sign up for whatever, or all that kind of stuff. We get all that ready for our folks. So build a worship team so you're not doing everything. It's hard enough to lead worship, let alone have to track everything else. So I've handed everything off to people in small chunks, and what has been a way to engage people, but also that your worship service just becomes a lot smoother. And then know what feeds you, and what are your limitations, and then what do you need to give away? This is like feels like leadership 101, right? What do you love to do that feeds you, even if you're not good at it? And because I think those are the things that you're going to try to get better at and really going to feed you, like you're going to be motivated to take care of. Know your own limitations. If you have figured out that you are not the person to be running the slides, don't do it anymore. If you constantly forget to hit record, give that away. I mean, there's lots of things that we, as leaders, we need to figure out. What are those things that while we might want to do it, or we feel like we're supposed to do it, maybe we shouldn't be. And so how do you give those things away and honor your own limitations, because everybody has them and it's okay. And you're modeling in a way kind of the priesthood of all believers, but also this understanding that we're not great at everything and we need to share how we go about doing our work. And the last thing about the leadership piece, please, if you have not already, I hope you have, take a full Sunday off. This time we're in is not coming to an end anytime soon. And we will be exhausted, and your bodies, minds, hearts, and spirits will be exhausted if you're not taking a full Sunday off. It doesn't mean invite a guest preacher in. but to figure out a way, one of the ways that our church is going to do it is we're letting our staff off for an entire week and just sending all of our people to another church for worship. And then we're going to do that for their congregation so that I'm not having to still prep all the way during the week. We're actually letting our staff, all of us that work on this service, we get the whole week off and then we come back fresh the next week. And we're going to do that with another congregation where their whole staff takes it off. They just get a link from us and an invitation that says, hey, this Sunday we're worshiping over at First Pres Palo Alto. And I tell my folks, on this Sunday, you're going to go worship at Valley Presbyterian Church. I know some presbyteries, I don't know if any of your presbyteries have done it, the presbytery leadership has conducted a worship service and just told the pastors, go ahead and take the day off, right? And presbytery, I don't know if presbytery folks right now are freaking out about that, or that might be a great idea. But to offer an opportunity for people to just take a Sunday off and worship as a whole presbytery or whatever churches want to join you, but ways to really, again, our continuing ed travel, our study leave, all of that are not happening in the same way. So take a Sunday off. All right. Boom. All right. There we go. There's our first round. Let's do some Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing and let's go. Here we go. Questions, thoughts?
Bruce, we had some questions that came in over the chat.
Perfect. Go for it.
Start with those. One is, can you recommend a microphone or type of microphone to use?
Yes. All right. So there's different levels. So here is one. This is the Blue Snowball. This is a very basic, solid microphone that I use for most of what I do. I have it on a swing arm with a shock mount. So if you want to, I think it does help, but if you also just want to make yourself look fancy. So that's what I use for most of what I do and for our worship service. If you want to upgrade a little bit more, and depending on where you're moving to for sanctuary, so there's the Blue Snowball, which is a good bait. It's like $50 or something. I don't remember exactly what it is. You can upgrade to the Blue Yeti, which is an excellent mic as well. And that one would be, you're upgrading. It's, I think, 150-ish. But, when you're talking about long-term use, it's probably good investment. And then if you really want to get fancy, there's ones that ramp up a little bit more, like there's the Shure 58s. But I'm upgrading to what's called the Rode Podcaster, and it's a unidirectional microphone that I'll replace my Snowball with. And that's, again, less than $200, but it's a little higher end in terms of its quality. So it's called a Rode Podcaster. And the thing about the Rode Podcaster that I like is it has a microphone input a headphone input in the microphone. So you're actually getting the exact sound in your ears about what you're saying and what you're sounding like. So if you're podcasting or getting into that, or you're recording and you want a really solid mic, you may want to go ahead and leap over the Snowball. Again, Snowball's a great mic. It'll work for most everything. Leap over that and go to a Yeti or a Rode Podcaster.
Also, someone's wondering, do you have any advice on any other platforms besides Zoom?
Yeah, so folks have wondered about that because of all the Zoom problems they've been having. I don't know if any of you watched the Patriot Act with Hassan. He talks about Skype. You missed out. Skype has totally dropped off and not had taken up this opportunity. But everybody was gone on Zoom. The reason we're staying with Zoom is because everybody's using it. So I would have loved if Google Meet had been better earlier. But we're now at the point where we're not able to, I'm not willing to transition the hundreds of people that we've integrated onto Zoom over to Google Meet, but they're starting to catch up with some of the features. So I would say that's good. If you really wanted to start, again, the reason Zoom was so good is because it was so accessible, and that's the reason it had so many problems. So part of it is you're gauging your accessibility versus the leaps that you need to make. So, some folks are using Microsoft Teams, but I find Microsoft to be a little clunky, and getting people into that universe is a little bit more difficult. So, and some may not want to be in Microsoft world. The other is, you could use GoToMeeting or one of those services, but those cost a little bit. And I don't think you actually need that kind of power. So there are other options. If I were to move somewhere, I'd go to Google because I'm a Google person. And that's where I would gravitate towards next. but I haven't tried to do it with a large community at this point. I think the cross-platform Zoom at this point is more ideal. So there aren't ones that are that everybody's using as much in their other locations, but Google is probably your next best bet because a lot of schools have gone to it. Some businesses are now using it too, but I would probably shift over to there if you were trying to think about the next thing to use or an alternative to use. That's probably where I would go.
Sandy Stemple has her hand up. Did you have a question, Sandy?
No, I think it's very interesting though.
Okay.
Also, the question is about what do you think about Facebook Live?
So, well, it's the funniest thing. There's all this amazing Facebook stuff happening from groups that I'm involved with, and I'm taking a break. So I'm not going to be seeing any of them, which is kind of a bummer. I have found that, well, there's a couple things about it. I think Facebook Live and Zoom, the handshake is not consistent. So you may want to use a third-party platform in between. So Restream is the one that most folks will use that seems to be more stable. Going from Zoom to Facebook Live. If you're purely streaming, you're going right to Facebook Live. That's one thing. It's a matter if you're going to go from Zoom and then to Facebook Live. I'm one that likes the simplicity of being where you are. So we are not streaming to Facebook Live only because I like the interaction we have in our somewhat intimate community. We have about anywhere from 85 to 110 logins on a Sunday, which means, who knows, 100 to 150 people are in the service itself. And I think folks really enjoy that interaction. You can do some of that on Facebook. That's certainly true. You can interact a lot, but it's different. So I would think that if you're going to do Facebook Live or YouTube Live, just embrace that and do it because you can still interact. You can be on there. But if you're going to do both, make sure that you have a team that's over on Facebook Live that's interacting so that the church is in both places. So it's not as if Facebook Live, you're just observing what you're doing on Zoom, but no, you're actually conducting worship in multiple spaces. So I think the most of the problems I've heard with Facebook Live has just been the consistency and the being able to connect to Zoom. So again, if you're going straight to Facebook Live, do that well. You can do a lot of the same elements of creating a team, all that, interact with people, all those kind of things. Just, the handshake between Zoom and Facebook Live sometimes gets a little funky. So that's why we didn't do it. I'm trying to avoid all of the ways in which the technology can take away from the experience.
Bruce, do you have a tech team as part of your worship team?
So yes, so we have what we call tech. We have a couple tech deacons, and those are the folks that we've trusted with a couple of things. I was constantly forgetting to hit record, and so there's two things that we hand off right away: somebody who does record, and then somebody who locks our service down at 10:30. So at 10:30, you can't get in anymore. We figure that's enough time for people to be late to church. And then they're also the ones, they're co-hosts. And so we've given them permission to drop people, to unmute, to mute, to all the things that that you would need to do. So we have multiple people who I've made co-hosts go ahead and do that. Now, if you're not comfortable being the host, because you then have control over breakout groups, who can be a co-host, all those kind of things, you may want to have somebody else operate that space and they make you a co-host so you can share your slides or do whatever. I also control my own slides in terms of advancing because as I talk, my slides kind of move behind me. And that was the way I did it in person as well. So it's half control needs of mine and half it's a comfortable space for me. And so we filled out all the other pieces that make more sense for other people to do all of the tech.
In the chat, I'm going to give you a two-part question because it's two different people. They're two different things, but they're sort of related. Okay. One is, which Zoom license level do you use? And also, with Zoom, how do visitors find you? Since they login and password required. Yes. Great question. So again, some of this is cost and all those kind of things. You have to measure how you want it. So like many of you, you probably started out with a free version and then you're like, okay,
I'll upgrade to the $15 a month one. And then you started to find out that that was overloading your meetings and all these things, and you couldn't, there's just a lot of things going on. So what we ended up doing was that we just have the $15 one, which is that next level up. And then we've added 4 other accounts. One, a second church office account. And then we cover all the 3 staff that hold a lot of Zoom meetings. Myself, our music person, and a parish associate at this point. What that does is, one, the billing goes straight to the church, which is always helpful. But 2 is it allows you to name alternative hosts as you're setting up meetings. So I, as my administrator, she could set up meetings and then invite me or Andy to be a co-host, or to be an alternative host, so that they can log in and just host it. So that's the basic line we have. So I would encourage folks, if you can afford that, go ahead and do 2 at least. What that does, there's a couple of reasons that works a little bit better. Is one, if you only have 1 meeting, 1 account, that means that you either have to share your login information with multiple people, which is probably fine, or somebody has to log in from that account, wait till somebody joins, and then transfer hosting to them, and then log back out, which is really like a 10-minute thing. But we started finding that me and my administrator, we're having to log into multiple meetings during a day just to give somebody else a hosting responsibility. So we created the second office account so that we could hand that one out more freely. So I would encourage at least a second one. So that's about $30 a month. The other 2 things that we've done is we upped our participant level. So we bump up to allow 500, which I really wish they had a lower one than that, because you top out at 100 logins, and we get over that on most Sundays, but not by a lot. So we're having to jump to where we can have 500. So you can go from 100 to 500. I wish there was something in between. And I think that's $50 a month. So that's the other piece that we've done, that one. And then we have a webinar series that we're starting, and we've upgraded there. So again, a lot of it is cost, and whether it makes sense for you to do that consistently or not. I would hope, again, I'll say some presbyteries are really helping churches to cover some of that for churches that really does become a cost issue. But I think for $15 or $30 a month to have a couple accounts, it's totally worth it. That's the first part. Second part?
Yep. Second part, yes. How do people find you?
Oh, that's right. Thank you. So as you know, there's been lots of pieces around how things get out so that you don't get Zoom bombed. I'm sure you've all been in a meeting that's been Zoom bombed. If you have not, don't look forward to it. I've been in multiple meetings that have been Zoom bombed, and it's awful. So a couple of things that we do. So you want to, the struggle is if you just put the links out, then you get more easily Zoom bombed, because people are scanning websites now and they're looking for particular strings of characters to be able to get into meetings. So there's a couple things that we do. We make everybody register, which is a little bit of a deterrent. We put a registration link out there, and I'll tell you how we do that in a minute. So that is a little bit of a deterrent. The second deterrent, though it doesn't promise anything, is we use a waiting room. So if somebody really had dodgy intentions, they would register, have to get that email back that says how to get into the meeting, and then have to wait in a waiting room for somebody to let them in, and then wait until they actually got video, which is not until about 15-20 minutes into our service. So they could be in the chat room and start messing up, but we have people that are on that if they needed to be. So those are some of the security measures we took in terms of how people get in. The other piece that's really important to do is to not share anywhere publicly the actual registration link, as it's that really long link that you get from Zoom, or even if you're just sharing the link out, not to share it with the link with the password embedded. Use a service like Bitly and to create to personalize links. So Bitly is a link shortener, and it shrinks the link down, and then you can give it a unique name. So if I could tell you ours is Bitly, and it's / Zoom Worship FPCPA, and that then takes you to our registration page. But what it doesn't do is doesn't allow people to search for those things. so that it gets people out. So that's the link we share publicly on our Facebook invites, on our newsletter, all of that. We take the link from Zoom, we go to bit.ly and shorten it, and that way it avoids all the scanners that are out there looking for Zoom links. So that's we share it on Facebook. We share it on our website, but you'll notice it's a bit.ly link and it's not the Zoom link. So so we share it as much as we can everywhere, but not the Zoom link. Cool. All right. Next.
So
We'll do a couple more.
If it's possible with Zoom, because you said with their platform they've had trouble transferring music. You've had any problems transferring music from Zoom?
Transferring music.
Bringing in music, bringing in special music.
Yeah. So a couple things. Let me just say, if you want to go onto YouTube and look for First Presbyterian Church Palo Alto, we post all of our services in their entirety, so you can see how it's worked well or not well for us in a variety of ways. So music. So what I tell our music folks, and this is a church that it's a fairly traditional church, more traditional than I am liturgically. So they love their choir. It's a great choir. And that's been the hardest part. For many of our churches, that's been the hardest part. We have to constantly tell people that music on Zoom is never going to be like it was in person. It's just never going to sound as good live. But we've done a few things. So when you can do recorded, we've done recorded, and it's been fine, though not great. And you just have to make sure that when you share the video, that you're clicking on those pieces that says, when you share it, you have options. There's 2 boxes where it says that you can share computer audio and optimize for video. So you want to make sure you do that. And even still, depending on bandwidth for your computer, for your place, and the receiving places, the audio is going to be fine, but it may not always match up with if there's mouths moving. So just know that it's never going to be perfect, because bandwidth and internet speed everywhere impacts how well video gets to move back and forth. The thing that's worked the best for us has been our organist / choir person from the congregation, from the church. Now, I don't lead worship at all from the church. I haven't been in our sanctuary more than one time in the last 4 months. But our organist sits in, if you can see it. So our organist is here, and then we have a singer who's here, and then the camera and microphone are way over here. So when they see, if you look at our service from the 7th of June, what you see is, so Elliot's would be the first person on the screen, and then way in the background is Andy on the organ. So they're separated. The singing is happening away from Andy, and people can sing, and the organ is playing, and they're just using a snowball mic, and that's been the best thing. That has worked out well for our music. Again, I'm not a big fan of recorded music unless you really have to. We bring in musicians all the time to do special music. Some plug right into their computer, which makes a big difference, and then they share computer sound. Others just are playing into their computer microphone or have an external mic, and you just deal with what that sounds like. But I'd rather have live music come in and not sound as good than to do recorded. And that's my personal preference. But original sound, make sure you always kind of enable people to use original sound, and all your musicians, make sure you do that. If you're using any video or audio, make sure you've switched it to use computer audio when you share it. And then you could find ways to, even if you look at our last service, we had somebody with a track on their phone held to the microphone and them singing. It wasn't the best sound ever, but it worked for the people we knew kind of being into our service. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, couple more.
Let's open it up. Anyone want to ask any questions? Anyone at all?
Anyone at all? It's a lot of stuff, I know.
Susan raised her hand. Do you want to say anything, Susan?
Yeah. Thanks. How have you changed your community gatherings as this has gone on longer and longer? And I know you all made a statement that you're not meeting till 2021. Yeah. So what are some of the adaptations that you have gone through? You said we all tried to do stuff really quickly, and then things lose energy, and I was wondering if you could talk through one of those adaptations.
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned that a little bit in the second part, but I'll address some of this now. So like many of you, I overfunctioned hugely at the beginning of this and made assumptions about what people wanted or needed, probably without really asking people. Like I just went into I'd fix it mode for I know many people. I had a friend on Twitter or something says, I'm watching all my pastor friends overfunction. And it's very true. So if you did that, you are not alone. And so we started right off the bat, like these 4 gatherings that people could go to. And then, a month in, we're like, oh, people don't really want this. Like at the beginning, folks are like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to all of them. And then they kind of like in real face-to-face time. So what we did is we allowed ourselves to shut things down and to not see not having online gatherings as some way to say we're not doing work and we're not doing the things we need to do. So what we did is we adapted in many ways to just find what worked for our folks. So we started a Bible study out of this that they haven't had in a long time, because that was a piece that we felt like, oh, we could do that now in a way that more people could go to it. So we started to actually ask people what they wanted, novel as leadership, and not just assume. So we really shifted that. That was one of the things we did. The other piece that we've shifted quite a bit, I think, is just this idea that folks really have to embrace the idea that we're not coming back in person, and that there are people connecting to our community that will never come to us physically, or have come to us again, but are never going to return geographically to where we are. And so now all of our language and what we're doing has to reflect a new community that's growing. And that's a hard shift, because if your language is always peppered with when we get back, when this is over, you're reminding all of the new people who are connecting with you that they're not going to be part of this long term. Like this is just going to be the end. And that may be a decision you're making. But we are kind of stepping into this space of like, oh no, we're going to keep doing this. And so our language has had to change. When we talk about things in worship, I talk about being geographically centered in Palo Alto, but that we are trying to impact and influence a greater community because we now have people from all over the country. We have 2 international people that show up every Sunday, which is kind of a funky. One person gets up at 1 a.m. in the Philippines and joins us for worship. And she moved there. And I mean, so there's all kinds of ways that we have to adapt our language and our for people that are now joining and getting active. So that's probably been the biggest piece for us. The other stuff we're just holding meetings, we're holding gatherings. We've shifted all meetings off of Sundays, because for a while folks were still meeting on Sundays after worship. And I'm like, why are we still meeting on Sunday after worship? Because the only reason we were doing that before is everybody was there. And finally was like, yeah, why can't we meet now at, now sometimes we can even meet during the day, and working people are like, yes, I'll meet during the day because they can. So that's been another shift. All right. Hope that's helpful. I'll take one more and then I'll talk about breakout groups.
Have you considered live streaming your service once you get back to the church?
So I think that's going to be the thing that a lot of folks will do. That's not where we're headed. We are going to head towards a legitimate hybridized service that will still be on Zoom and have people in. And a couple of reasons why, I'll dive into this in our next section, is that we're, in California, and I think in other places too, but in California, it's going to be a long time until our folks are going to be able to gather in our worship space. We have a lot of folks who are in like 55 and up retirement communities who are very active, but most of them have told us they're not coming back into an indoor space. One, their communities aren't letting them out, but 2, like the Zoom service has been great. So why would we any risk to come into a space? So our community, we're going to begin to work through what does a hybrid worship experience actually look like. Again, I'll dive into that next. So we're not going to live stream in a traditional live streaming kind of way. Now, that's a totally legitimate way to do it as your next step. but I don't really consider that hybrid. I consider that live streaming. So you're still focused on a centrality of your sanctuary, and those who are outside of it are watching that experience. Now they may interact and everything, but it's still focused on the community that is in person together, which again is not good or bad, but I'm pushing for us as our community to really lean into this hybrid experience where it isn't about the specific location geographically. It's about we're still gathering online. We just happen to be coming from different spaces. So that's why we're in no hurry to get back into our sanctuary. Okay. All right. Unless there's a pressing one. It's weird when I'm on Spotlight because I can only see me and I'm just kind of dancing with myself.
Is there, can you talk just real quick about registration? You do that so that people can't just directly.
So there's a couple of reasons we do that. One is it's a deterrent, right? Again, if somebody really wants to get into your service and raise havoc, they can do that because we're not creating closed off systems where nobody can get in. Now, if you're a smaller congregation, my mom pastors a congregation that gets, I don't know, 30 or so people registered. I can't remember exactly, but they're able to kind of verify people in the waiting room. And if there's a strange number, they just ask everybody else, like, does anybody know this phone number? So that's one way you use registration and waiting room, is so that people come in with their names. And so you can let people in that you know. That's one thing. For us, we use registration for a couple of reasons. One is that deterrent, but we also then capture everybody's emails. And so we will send out a piece, a quarterly, that kind of says, you've registered for our worship service. We're really glad you've done that. Again, if you want to sign up for our email list, here is the link. And so it's not a matter of, we're not blasting those emails all the time, but we're acknowledging that they did register and we're making contact. So we're kind of using it as an evangelism tool as well. The other piece is then if you make any changes, it can notify everybody registered that you've extended the number of worship services, or you're ending them. Like if you delete it and you say notify all registrations, they'll get a notice that says it's over. So there's ways you use that collected information to actually communicate with people. But again, that registration link that's given to you in Zoom, I'd go ahead and shorten it in Bitly so that it's not, the spiders and scanners online won't pick that up. And it's, again, another just safety precaution.
Do you use the same meeting ID and password every week?
So it's all embedded all together. So when you set up your registration for your meeting, you can embed the password, and it's a unique link for every person that registers. So that means that it's the same one they can use forever. And so when they hit that link every time, they'll come in as them. Now, how we learn this, so I'll tell you, is that I register for our service, and I thought it was going to be cute. And I'm like, oh, so that means that my link, I could just give that to people. That way people don't have to go through registering. Now, it says it's a personalized link, but clearly Bruce didn't read that or didn't believe them. So everybody who used that link came in as Bruce Reyes-Chow. So on one Sunday, no joke, we had like 36 people all show up in the waiting room as Bruce Reyes-Chow because we had used that link to send out. So the good thing is it works, right? It works. It's unique to the person once they register, and they don't have to do anything but hit that link, whatever it's called, join this meeting or whatever it is. And then they can just use that one all the time. So that's, get your folks trained to use that link. That way you're not having to constantly send out, here's how you do this, here's how you do this. And we have that registration link and blasted in all of our emails, everything we send out. So folks just know that's all they have to do is register. And if they register again with the same email, Zoom connects it all. So they don't have to worry about that. Some people register every Sunday because they forget that they can go back and use the same link. All right, I want to move us to our breakout rooms. So you're going to get separated into breakout rooms for a little bit, and just have two questions about this. So there's one: what have you learned about yourself and your congregation during this time? I find this to be really interesting. What are the surprises that you've been able to learn, and then what possibilities for being church differently might God be revealing before your community? What are the things how is God saying, hey, look, you've learned these things about yourself, and now here are possible ways that you may be able to do things a little differently. So would encourage a little interaction and to go into your groups. And I think you're going to get, I'll stop sharing, and I think you're going to get broken up into. All right. Well, welcome all. Here we go. We got half an hour left. So I'm going to blow through. We're going to keep going. It's like drinking water from a fire hose. Or if for you Lucille Ball people, you remember the episode where Lucy and Ethel are shoving chocolate into their face? That's basically what my talks are always like. All right. So I want to talk about hybrid worship. I will talk about what that is in a minute, but also, I was constantly reframing the conversation about worship as, we weren't closed. We were never closed, but we were really thinking about how to engage in worship together in different ways. And so the things that the church is and does, we didn't stop doing those things. We continued to pray with people. We call people, we interact with folks. We're locked out of hospitals at this point, but trying to connect and do the things that we always do. I think is important for folks to know that this pandemic didn't close us. It just shifted the way we needed to be in the world. And so wanted to make sure that folks, as you think about how you use language and understand what's gone on, that we didn't really close. So I'm going to talk a little bit next, though, about the idea that we're playing with called hybrid church, or thinking about the expanded table as we move forward. So this is thinking a little bit as you're wondering what's going to happen next with your community. I'm going to take you through about 4 things. Want to look at how I think about this theologically, talk about lived community online, and then how you curate your space, and then a little bit of logistics. So as we're thinking about hybrid church, as we're thinking about this next thing, how I perceive hybrid church is this understanding that our geography is no longer the thing that binds us. The thing that binds us now is that we are gathering around a table that is now virtual. That's a table that is an interactive, online, cloud-based table that we've always really thought about, and that we've always said out loud that the table is welcome to all. The table is greater than this one that's in our sanctuary. And now we're actually given the chance to live that out. But I will say, before you're thinking about this is a way to proceed. It is not the way, because I think not everybody is going to be into and have capacity and passion for pastoring a church like this or leading a congregation like this. And so one of the things that I would, that you begin to, as you're thinking about this, is can you begin to articulate, and not just articulate, but champion kind of a theological understanding of a church being called together that is beyond your building and your borders and your geography? Can you begin to think about, what does our congregation look like if it's not bound by the sanctuary? Now, if that is something like, that's just not something I'm interested in, that's a fine, legit answer. But if you're able to kind of be like, yeah, I can actually see us as much bigger than this space, because what we've learned from our experience so far is that we're connecting with people that are not part of this geographic location. And so as you begin to think about your future as a worshiping community in particular, but this goes beyond that, what does it look like for you to see yourself as a non-geographic congregation? And for some folks, that starts to freak people out a little bit, because like, well, what does that mean? So that mean that I could have a member from another state? And I'm like, that's what it would mean. Now, I know, like, folks are like, oh, like I've had folks joke with me already, like, no sheep stealing. And I'm like, that's not the point. We're trying to create a space and a situation that draws people, and they're not held back now by the geography, the time, the accessibility, all of that it was what hampers people often from coming into our physical locations. So a couple of questions I would ask us and ask yourself is, do you think there's such a thing as real church? Like, do you think that one is real and one is not? And beginning to think about how you understand church itself and congregational life. Do you see, well, real church is the one when we gather back together, and the rest of it is virtual, so it's not real. That, how you answer that and understand that and develop that thinking will inform how successful you'll be at being able to create a truly hybridized community where some folks are online and some folks are in person. And then one of the questions I think as you're entering this conversation is to ask yourself when you cross the line between worshiping what we do and worshiping God. Because I do think that the inertia to push us back into face-to-face, in-person gatherings is sometimes driven by things that we think are important that may not be anymore. Like figuring out what is essential to our worship experience, why, what do we do that is non-negotiable, and what are the things that we've learned that we can just let go, and what are those pieces? So to think about how we begin to think about your preaching and your lay leadership and all that kind of stuff, and what are those things that are gonna start to be calcified that you want to avoid that at the beginning. So here's how I think about it is I think about this as an expanded table, that we've stood behind these wooden tables for so long. And again, we've spoken metaphorically about this. And now we just are given the chance to act as if that's true. We're given this opportunity to say, we really truly believe that this table is expansive. And so now we're living that out, and people are coming to the table that haven't been for years, or it's the first time, or whatever. They've been hurt before at the table, and now you're providing a place where there's healing and hope. Like to think about this as a much broader experience of creating community that is no longer bound by the borders of your sanctuary. So I want to talk a little bit about some of our congregation itself. So this is our sanctuary, very traditional looking sanctuary. It looks like, thousands of other churches out there these days. This is First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. What we did, I got somebody that is unmuted, so we're getting a little feedback. On May 20th, our congregation, we decided that we were no longer going to have worship in-person gatherings until 2021. Now, when we did that, I think we're kind of one of the first through the wall, and I think it was very dramatic. It felt drastic for some folks, and what we're hearing now is a lot of churches are beginning to land in the same place, which is great. We have no problem helping people prompt that. Our conversations were very easy, actually. We had folks that, one, our Zoom worship was going so well and so smoothly that folks like, this is great. And two, it was our older folks were telling us, I call them the danger demographic, so it makes them feel special. They were not, they're like, we're not coming back anyway until there's a legit way that we can gather together. We're not coming back. And so we knew that. And the other piece is our inertia and activity was being driven by and informed by this kind of unknown when we get back. And so we couldn't do any planning. We were really having a hard time thinking about Advent. We were trying to figure out, okay, so what are we going to do for the summer? And this allows us as a congregation and as the leadership and those of us that are kind of helping to plan and think about our future, it freed us up to actually think about those things in a way that's more strategic and a little more planned out and proactive. And so what it did for us was say, okay, so now we're thinking about 2021. What does the flow of our life together look like between now and then? And we're having conversations about what does it mean to be hybrid church. So we asked ourselves some questions as we were thinking about this. And again, I shared this with you because this moving into a different way of being church is not just a pastoral leadership program and idea. It has to be owned by the community and moved together in a methodical, not slow, but just in a way that folks are really behind this. This is like how you would lead any massive change, right? How do you get people engaged? So our session, these are the questions we asked ourselves, right? Similar to what I have you ask yourself is, what have you learned? What have we lost? What have we gained? Beginning to dive into the impacts and the realities of COVID-19. And then what were the possibilities? What we constantly heard was from what we've gained, what we lost were, well, there's like 3 people that haven't been able to get online. Okay, well, we're working on those people, and we've managed to get a couple of those back on. But what we've gained we have multiple generations of people worshiping together now because kids moved away, have started families, and now they're worshiping all together. We've had people who moved away and were theologically are not in a space where they found a congregation, and so they've come back and are now interacting. We've had people connect with us who are geographically bound theologically and have come and are worshiping with us continuously. We've had people who have wanted to dip their toe in worship, and the anonymity that Zoom provides is an amazing way for people to experience church again without being put on the spot. We invite people to introduce themselves in our chat room, but people don't have to. So I get texts every once in a while that says, "Hey, I've been in worship the last couple of weeks. Just wanted to let you know," like a friend who has never been to church before, but was feeling some need for that. So we're a waylay station for some places where their worship hasn't been able to get online. We're a place where pastors were on vacation, they'll come. But there's this gain of community that folks have experienced that they would have never experienced before. And that's influenced the excitement and joy about what might be next, and that conversation about what are the possibilities that may be laid out before us. And so what it means, though, is that we are now having these conversations about being hybrid, being significantly, intentionally a church that is both online and in person without favoring either. That we are pretending when we move into some in-person experience in 2021 that those who have come along on Zoom, we're not saying goodbye to them. We're just inviting them to shift into another visual location, but still using the same platform. So as I'm thinking about this with our folks, these are some of the ways that we're doing this. This is not going to work unless you have lived community, meaning that you have to be able to create a space where, as you're moving into in-person planning, folks are immediately saying to themselves, "But what about so-and-so? But what about so-and-so who are not going to be able to be there because they're only online?" So creating community that actually lives hybrid life will allow you to plan without you having to constantly challenge about who isn't there. Because again, the inertia to create exactly what you did before is going to be really strong, but it can't be the same because you have this whole group of people who have now been connecting with you in an online platform. And so the more you can create lived experience of community and hybrid church before you get to thinking about gathering back together, the more you don't have to continually remind people, "But what about so-and-so?" Because they've already accepted and are embracing them as part of the community. And those who are going to be in person are already thinking about, "But what about so-and-so? My grandchild, my child, whatever it's going to be." So figuring out how you get people to that space is important. So ways you do that: change the language in your worship, your online worship, that no longer centers on physical space. So no longer centers on the fact that you are only going to be real church again when you get back, or language that when we get back together. Because again, all that messages to people who are never going to be in your geographic space is, "This is short term, we're going to say goodbye to you soon." If you change that language and you start to invite and create community that's broader, then they're going to dive in and be more committed to the community and find out more about what you're doing. It means that you have to create more intimate spaces for interaction. So one of the things that you don't get to do when you have 100 people logged into Zoom is you don't interact with people individually. So create those spaces where 3-4 people. We do a coffee hour afterwards that is about 15 minutes long. It's too short, but I keep it short on purpose, just to kind of say this. You get these short bursts of interactivity with each other, and then you create other ways to have people gather in smaller groups that are meaningful. So for instance, we knew that people wanted a new Bible study. We started a new Bible study. We are finding different ways for people to connect with each other that creates this idea that we're not bound by our physical location. And then be proactive about pushing against the inertia of going back. So what I mean by that is, as you start to hear people think about, when we're back, we can again do this, or when we're back, we get to do this, or this is the thing. Like, again, you're going to be drawn back to doing exactly what you did beforehand. Even though you've been experimenting all this time, that inertia is strong. So be proactive. Don't just when it starts to happen, once you start back in, ahead of time, start to really think about what is your worship service going to begin to look like that takes into account this hybrid space, that you have people that are in person and online, and you're not just trying to stream an experience, you're trying to create an experience that honors both existences, the online and the in-person. So here's a couple of ways that I think you're going to need to think about your space and how we're starting to initially think about it. Again, we're not going back until 2021, so we're not having a ton of conversations yet about our space. But the first is this, was to create physical reminders that your in-person community is not the center of the worship experience. So I already know that when we step back into our sanctuary, I will have my laptop up front on a table with lighting and a microphone, so that folks, when they are watching, as I'm leading them in worship, as I'm looking out into the probably 20 people that we can have, I'm also looking at the 100 people that are sitting on the screen, and I'm interacting, preaching, thinking with that whole community. And so when they're looking, they know that that's what's happening. So there's physical, actual reminders that you're not just streaming an experience, but that you are not, that the folks are out there from everywhere. Again, I'm thinking that DJ looking station, it's going to feel uncomfortable, but not as uncomfortable as it would have felt 3 months ago. Right now, people are like, oh, okay, yeah, that's how we do it. So I think, deciding how you're going to look and how it's going to feel and jive with your sanctuary space, and still, you don't want to just throw a bunch of wires up there and have it not look tended, but how are you going to kind of create a space that reminds people that they're not the only in the center of your worship experience. Find ways to have faces shown to all people. We're working on one big screen that will sit behind me up in the chancel area that will project faces, and somebody will be kind of be church in the Zoom meeting and work with that. So that's one of the things we're playing with. We also have side screens that we may try to get folks on, but just to have the idea that again, the visual reminders that there's people in a lot of different spaces. It's going to be weird. It's going to be odd, but I think taking this kind of seriously to try to create a hybrid space is going to be weird. But I think it's pretty exciting. This is an opportunity for change seating because of the precautions that you'll have to take. This, if you've ever wanted to move pews and do something different, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. I think that you can probably argue with the aesthetics people that having to block off pews is not as aesthetic. It's not as pretty. You're to be able to create space that creates a worship space that feels like you've tended to it, and makes space and room for video screens or ways that people can still connect with the people that aren't there. So use this as an opportunity to change your seating, and then make sure that you're upgrading your technology and your internet speed. You can't do anything about other people's internet speed because that's what they're going to have, but you can make sure that you're not the block. So if there's a way for you to upgrade your internet speed from your sanctuary, to make sure that you do that. Otherwise, again, the technology will be the distraction. And then upgrade and use different microphones. Get some tech people in to think about how you're going to do sound. As you're going to begin, you're going to probably want to go through your sound system and then directly into your Zoom meeting so that you're not having to deal with multiple voices and sounds. So there's lots of different things you need to think about upgrading your technology and your internet speed. And then, as I always tell folks, as I mentioned before, practice, practice, practice. If it doesn't go off well because you haven't practiced, we've self-sabotaged the whole experience. It's one thing to practice and know you're pretty confident in how things happen. And that's just, that's grace and that's the spirit. But if you haven't practiced it, and you're creating a situation where you're bound to have problems that you didn't need to have. All right. For worship itself, again, I mentioned this before. This is where you get your tech team together. They really take much more experience, much more activity, because you're leading worship in person. They're really going to have to be in that chat room, be looking out for people that need help, Zoom bombers, all that kind of thing, to really have them. You're basically now having to create a couple of different teams, an in-person team and an online team. So if you have greeters who are helping people remain safe as they're coming back in, you also need to have greeters on your Zoom call or your Facebook streaming where they're greeting people and doing kind of the same thing. Again, we're not trying to build hierarchy. So you have to almost build two teams to offer people somewhat a similar experience of being welcomed into your community. And then an important thing when you get back into, if you want to do this hybrid thing, is to mix online leadership. So you could be preaching while you're in the sanctuary, but your liturgist is going to be spotlit on the screen, and they're going to be in their home or whatever state they're in, and so you're going to do that together, but online, just as you did before. So again, bringing in music, bringing in special guests who can come into your experience because of Zoom, into your worship experience, which you have never been able to have before. For us Presbyterians, we have tons of mission coworkers out there that would love to get into a congregation and tell them about the work they're doing in a particular part of the world. We now have the ability to do that like we never had before. So there's that kind of thing, and mix that into your in-person worship now that it's not going to feel as awkward, but make sure you mix it in. Make sure that it's, again, you're not creating an online worship experience that folks can simply watch from afar. All right, I'm going to run out of time, so I can keep going. 3-2 ritual does not create in and out. How do you do communion? How you do laying on of hands, baptisms, all of those things we're beginning to work out. What does it look like when some people are not there and some people are in the space? And then I still would encourage interactivity between all the attendees. So finding ways that if folks want to be on their phones and they want to turn their video and sound up, but they want to chat with people, that's fine with me. We don't know how that's going to look in our sanctuary, but we're bumping up our internet speeds that the folks can be online while they're in the sanctuary. So just figure out a way for people to continue to have that chat interaction that really made your kind of in-person interaction or your online interaction so good. Couple of big questions for you. Do you have the capacity and the conviction? Yes, go for it. If you are like, yes, this is it, we're going to try this, begin to build out those lived experiences. If you say no to this, that is totally fine. Again, this is one way for us to be church in the future. This is not going to be the way. This is one way to do it. And then maybe again, a perfectly good example of you're still thinking about it. And maybe not yet. You still got to do a little bit of interaction. But to inventory how you're feeling about the possibilities of holding worship that is both in person and online, our internal understanding of that as pastoral leadership, we have to answer that question for ourselves. And if it's not yet, then you're going to journey along that with your people. If it's like, no, I don't want, I just can't do it, I would really listen to that, because if you're not able to be in that space, it's really hard for you to lead people into that space. All right, we have 10 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing. Go. Questions.
Anyone just shout it on out.
I've got a question. What's the easiest way to get in touch with our mission coworkers who are interested in sharing either recorded videos or personal interaction?
So every mission coworker has their own page on the General Assembly website. So if you go to World Mission, I have a couple of friends who are in the Philippines and some others that we connect with, but every mission coworker has their own page with their contact information. So if you were to go to probably World Mission, and our website obviously isn't the best always, but you can find it, but you can get to every mission coworker. And there are going to be some that are going to be way into it and others are not going to be but I can guarantee you that there are people to get an opportunity to share their story in a congregation, totally up for it. Now, time change, you just have to know that that's going to happen. Like, we're going to have somebody coming in from the Philippines and it's 1 o'clock their time. So they're 1 o'clock in the morning, I should say. I see Forrest Palmer. Oh my gosh. Hello, Forrest. Sorry. Popped up on my screen. All right. Other questions?
Somebody asked about lighting suggestions at home and or church.
So it's be lit. Look at all the youngsters in the room. Make sure that you are actually really well lit in. So like I'm in my office now and I just have one light that's out here And then I have a swing arm light as well that I use. So you can do that. Some people will do the circle lights just to make sure that you're as clear as possible, so that what works for your community. Now, the biggest problem people make is they're backlit, and then it's really hard to get yourself so that you can be seen. So I think if you're coming back into the sanctuary, not many of our sanctuaries are really built well for online stuff unless you've been streaming already. But I think it's a great reminder. You can have lighting because people who are not in that sanctuary need to be able to see you well. So there's lots of different photo lighting out there that's not hard to find and not real expensive. So just to make sure that as you're looking that you're not backlit. And again, I have a gray wall here. I don't put a lot of clutter behind me. I don't have a bookshelf, that kind of stuff. So just to not let things be distracting. So anyway, just be well lit.
What about time with children? Do you do a moment for children?
Yeah, so children thing is a really difficult one. So we don't have any kids, so we haven't really had to deal with that as much. There are some people out there that are doing amazing things with their young people. I will say that if you're recording, you need to either get permission from parents, or we just make sure we don't have kids. Again, it's not a great thing to brag about, but we haven't had to deal with that. We had a moment for mission before that we dropped because all it did was remind people every Sunday how many kids were not involved with our church. So we will start to build that out hopefully next year. There are more people doing more stuff with Zoom and kids out there that you could find that are doing some amazing things. So that's really not one of my areas, other than safety is making sure that your kids aren't being recorded and posted anywhere. All right. Other questions?
How do you do virtual baptisms?
Well, that's a quick. I love the idea. So I haven't had to do it yet. I'm trying not to force anybody into being baptized, just so I can do it. But I do know of one that what they did is the officiant, the pastor, was on one side of the screen, right? So it was totally separate. This is when we were in severe lockdown, and they were fortunate in the parents of the child that was being baptized were elders. So what they did is they had the family, the parents, and their other siblings baptized the child as the officiant, as the pastor was saying the words. So I think about that. I'm like, that's amazing. Like God is in that somewhere. So that's the one way you've seen it where it's separate. You're totally separate. I think there's going to be room and space to do it in person in the future. That's not where we are, but my guess is that as churches are opening up to a little bit more options, being outside, making sure that families are really quarantining, and pastors, if they're going to wear, it's going to be odd for pastors to wear gloves during this. So pastors are going to have to really be super vigilant about health and safety. But I loved the idea of this Zoom-based baptism where the family were the ones that were putting the water on the child's head and hearing the words from their pastor as it was going on. So I think that's how we've seen it done in a totally virtual way. My guess is that's not going to be the push big time as more outdoor, as we're learning more that outdoor things are a little bit safer and short bursts of time and energy together. But still creating a sense that if you're not in that space, you're still part of it. It's still kind of the important piece. All right, next, got a couple more minutes.
Communion?
So communion, the way that we do it is multiple times early in the week, if you're new or whatever it is, in our registration email that goes out, and in the waiting room, we tell people bring something to eat and drink for communion, whatever that may be. And then so we did this right off the bat. I've always wanted communion every Sunday, and this allowed us to do it right away. So, and we just, I have people lift up their bread, I'd say the words, we break it together. I have a parish associate who rotates, and they do the cup, and we all do it together. So you see your screen with all of these people doing the elements, taking communion. And so that's been one of my favorite parts about this Zoom experience, is that we have people who are taking communion together as a family, cross state lines, that they haven't been in church together for a long time. It's been really meaningful for people. And it's for other folks where communion has always been a little weird and it's odd and it can be intimidating, but they're joining right in. Or it's giving people a chance to, like, I'm not doing communion. Whereas you're not, if you don't walk up on a Sunday, people notice. Here it's like, okay, great. So, I mean, I think that has been really, it's built community for us. All right, a couple more.
What about the importance of the people online seeing the people who are there in person?
Yeah, so that's where we're going to play with. Probably the most expensive thing that we're going to buy is our camera, and there are a couple out there now that, and I can't remember what they're called now because we're not totally looking, that are built for streaming, except we're going to point them the other direction, right? So rather than point at the worship space, we're going to have my guess is we might have two, one that's going to be pushing out towards the congregation, and then maybe one that's pushing in, but we haven't really thought that through. But my guess is the most expensive thing that you're going to need to get to make this work is going to be a camera of some kind. Now, some of the DSLRs out there can operate as your camera, and those are great. So if you have somebody already has a big fancy digital camera, but there are cameras out there that are specifically built for streaming. Some of you may already have them. And so you're looking at probably in the less than $1,000 range. You can certainly go more than that, but you're looking at, I think we're building out a budget of about $5,000, which is probably too much, but we're just trying to figure out what that is going to look like, but we have some time for planning. So we're doing a few different mics, but not a lot, because we're going to run through our sound system. Our screen is going to be different, and camera, one or two cameras will be an issue as well. So we already have a decent projector, and some of it is we're going to test it as we get closer. We'll have to test it out and see if it all works together. But there you go. All right, last question, and I got to be done.
Bruce, one quick comment. This is Sue. Mike, would you please put in the chat the link to Brian's video? We have different combinations of equipment that were specifically recommended as working together and things like that, and it might be helpful for those of you who were not on that video.
Oh, awesome.
Zoom. Thanks, Bruce. Sorry.
Yep. That's right. All right. Well, I'll do one last one. And again, feel free to get in touch with me. Twitter is good. Go for it.
I wondered what you imagined this might do to churches' relationships with buildings. This was a hot topic in my small discussion group, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
I think it changes the way we see our building. Now, we have a congregation. We have a couple of renters, and thinking about how that impacts how we are with our building. So needing to tend to the stewardship of the building. I think that's still going to be the same. I think long term, it is just going to take away the sacredness and the worship of our space. And then that frees us up, I hope, to think differently about, do we need the space that we have? I am not in any way, if any of my congregation members are listening to this or hear anything, I'm not in any way saying we're not getting it be in our worship space or we're ready to sell our building or anything like that. But I think it is an early question about what kind of space do we really need in order to be community. I think changing your pew structure for some of our churches is going to be huge, but that's a signal and a step into reimagining space. And I think as we go on, we're going to realize that we may not need the same kind of space that we've always thought we needed. There are other traditions and other churches, and even in our own denomination, who have already done this work and they've reimagined space. I think it's pushed a big majority of us to head down that journey a little bit faster than we would have ever thought we would go. Cool? All right, all.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciates it.
Very welcome. I'll send out information. Your leadership can send to you to stay in touch, keep in touch, connect. Feel free to connect with me. You Presbyterians are my family, so even if you want to do a half-hour Zoom call you have some questions, sometimes that's easier than sending me an email. Feel free just to get in touch with me, and we can schedule that out. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Bruce. Good to see you. Thank you for the Presbyterian.